Hi everyone, welcome and thank you so much for checking out my channel. My name is Tanny. I am an independent author and somebody who really just loves a good story. So on this channel I talk about writing, books I've enjoyed, and lessons I've learned on my publishing journey. Right now my YA fantasy novel is out with beta readers, and so I've been thinking a lot about my own beta reading process and kind of how it's evolved over the years. And so I've been doing this video series about beta reading and what my process looks like so that I can hopefully share some ideas and tips with you guys and just things that I've learned along the way as I've gone through the beta reading process multiple times now with different books. This video is the third in a 3-part series that I've been doing about the beta reading process. So I will link the previous ones in the description below if you want to check those out. In the first video, I just talked about some beta reading basics and things that you might want to know before you get started. The second video talked about the actual process of working with beta readers and some of the things that you might want to think about with that. And in today's video, I'm going to be covering what to do after you get feedback from your beta readers and how to go through it and implement it in your revisions. This is just my process for working with that feedback and incorporating it into my revisions. I do want to remind you all that everybody's process looks different, and it's okay if yours doesn't match up with mine exactly. I call this a process, but really this is kind of the messiest stage of beta reading as a whole for me. So I'll just try to explain as best as I can, but honestly it's kind of a mess. So take from it what you can and what you will. But also I would love to know from you guys if you have any tips and tricks for implementing feedback in your revisions and things that you found that had made it simpler and more efficient. Please leave a comment down below and let me know, because I'd love to hear some ideas as well. So before I start going through any of my feedback, it's really important to me to make sure that I am mentally and emotionally prepared to receive constructive criticism. Most of the time, if you're in the beta reading process, you're looking for critical feedback, and it's really important to me to get that feedback and to find beta readers who can be really honest with me about what's working in the story, but also about what's not, so that I know how to fix it. And if they're doing their job, they've found a lot of those issues, and a lot of the feedback that I'm going to receive from them is not going to be praise and adoration. It's going to be kind of negative maybe, and things that need to change and things that need to be fixed. This is a story that most of the time I have poured my heart and soul into for a year or more. And despite my best efforts, there are going to be certain things that are just not working and aren't landing right with readers. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be easy for me to hear that stuff, or that I'm not going to have strong emotional reactions to some of that feedback. So it's just really important to make sure that you're in a good mental and emotional state before you open up any of those comments and open yourself to that criticism. The biggest question I ask myself to kind of gauge where I'm at is, am I ready to hear things about my story that may be negative or hurtful? If the answer is no, then I just wait. I don't open the document. I don't do anything with it. I'll do it another day. It will still be there waiting for me, and I can just get to it later. Sometimes I might need to do some self-care things or just let some more time pass before I am ready to open those comments. I did recently make a self-care video for writers, so I will go ahead and link that if you want to check it out. But those are some of the things that I do to get ready. In that video, I talked about having a positivity folder where you just keep a bunch of comments or positive reactions to your story that you've gotten from readers or from critique partners or anybody else like that in the past. Words of encouragement, just things that kind of inspire me and make me feel better about my writing. And I like to have that open when I'm going through feedback sometimes, because it helps me to kind of balance out some of the negative stuff that I might be hearing with positivity and validation that, no, I really can do this writing thing. It's just, we got to go through the constructive criticism also, and we're just trying to make the story better. In my previous beta reading video, I talked about taking a break between drafts, and while the story is out with beta readers, I use that time to just kind of step back from the story. And another reason why I do that is so that I can be mentally and emotionally prepared to receive constructive criticism by the time my beta readers get back to me with their feedback. Okay, well, that was the easy part, and now this is kind of where everything becomes a mess. So I'm going to try to explain this as clearly as I can, but honestly, my process is not super clear or super well defined, and it kind of is still just changes depending on what I'm working on and what I feel like the story needs. So I'll try to explain it as best as I can, and hopefully there's something useful in here. And honestly, I feel like this part of the process is always kind of going to be a mess. I don't know of a better way to organize it for myself or to make it more simple or anything like that. If you have ideas, leave a comment. I'd love to hear them. But this is just kind of what has worked for me, and it's still just a mess, but that's okay. Okay, so obviously you'll want to review the feedback you received, right? Like, let's start there, if that makes sense. I will typically go through each beta reader's comments in their entirety. Because I send out entire manuscripts to my beta readers, then I get all of their feedback returned to me in one document. And I'll just sit there and I will go through the entire document and all of the comments in there. And after that, then I will move on to the next beta reader's document and go through that in its entirety. As I'm going through that document, I will usually have a new document that I've created open right next to it. And in that document, I will just start making a list of some of the big picture things that beta readers are bringing up, especially if they're things that are coming up more than once or from different beta readers. Then I will make sure that those are added to the list, maybe bolded or highlighted if they need to be, just to make sure that I know this is really important. This is something that I really want to pay attention to and focus on in my revisions. A lot of the times my beta readers will leave positive comments as well as I'm going through their feedback. And so this is a really good time to take some screenshots or just copy and paste comments and just kind of grab those so that you can reference them later and save them into that positivity folder that I talked about, so that later on when you're really struggling with the story, you can refer back to that and see that, no, there's some really good things about this story too. And if you don't have at least one beta reader who is leaving those positive comments or reaction gifs or just funny comments along the way, go find yourself that person, because you deserve to have somebody like that in your corner cheering you on. It's also important to know that at this stage, I'm really just focusing on those big picture elements. Sometimes beta readers will leave comments about lines that didn't work for them, and I just leave those comments alone. I don't do anything with them, but if they're big picture kind of stuff, comments about characters or about plot inconsistencies or world building information that isn't very clear, bigger things like that, those are the things that I will make a note of in my revision document so that I know to focus on those later. And then once I've added those things to the revision document, I will delete the comment. Or if I've already grabbed a screenshot or copied the positive comments, I'll delete those comments as well. And that's just to help me kind of pare down some of those bigger things and the things that I will be referring to elsewhere when I'm actually doing the revisions that I don't need to keep in the document. I don't need those comments saved. It just makes the process a little more streamlined for me and clears out some of the clutter and the redundancy that I don't need. And then again, like I said, I will move on to the next document from a different beta reader and start that process all over again. Just start at the beginning, go through all the comments all the way to the end, copy and paste the ones that I need to save and refer to later, delete the ones that I don't. If they're just minor things that need to be fixed, I'll usually just leave those in the document and refer to them later as I'm doing my revisions. And usually by the time I have finished that process with all of the manuscripts from all of my beta readers, it's time for a nap or a snack or a break. I'm like, my brain is so fried by the time I get done with that. I just need to take a break and step back for at least a day, but usually it's a few days. A lot of the times there will be big things that I kind of need to ruminate on and think about before I decide to jump in and make any drastic changes. And so I just kind of take a few days to let things sit for a minute and simmer around in my head, and then I will go back to it after a little while. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is decide what to fix. This is where it's time to go back into that revision document that I created and really get down to the nitty-gritty of what needs to change, which is easier said than done. There's no real method here. It's all just a mess. I don't know what I'm doing. I have been trying to be a little more organized in the way that I go about this process, and I think that's working. It seems to be working okay for now. So here's kind of what I've landed on as far as my process goes. I have my manuscript divided into sections of chapters, and after each section, I'll ask readers some questions. And so when I am going through my revisions, I try to do those a section at a time. And so in that revision document that I created that has my whole list of things that need to be fixed and changed in the story, I will start breaking that down and sorting those pieces out into which section of the story they belong in. So for example, if there's an issue with the beginning of the story and I have a section for chapters 1 through 5, I will put that piece into that section for those chapters. If there's something wrong with the ending of the story, then that would go in that section for those chapters, like, 25 through 30 or whatever it is. So I'll just go through that list that I made and take all the pieces and the notes that I made and slot in where those changes need to go by section. A lot of the times you'll have bigger overarching things that need to change throughout the entire story, or elements that you need to weave into the entire story. For me, a lot of times there are descriptions that just are nowhere to be found because apparently I don't like to write those in my first or second drafts. We just ignore them. It's fine. And so I will have, a note at the top of the document saying, include descriptions for what characters look like, include descriptions of setting, things like that. If it's an issue like that that needs to be worked into the whole story, I put those at the very top of the document and just have a running list of things like that need to be woven into the entire story better. A lot of the times there will be world building stuff or things about the magic system, or things about a character's arc or development or over the course of the entire book that I need to be re-examining and rethinking as I'm revising. This is also kind of where you need to decide which beta reader feedback to give more weight to and which to not ignore, but to think about a little differently and figure out what are you really going to change and how are you going to change it? Or is this just something that one beta reader had an issue with and other readers are not going to mind at all? If multiple beta readers have commented on the same issue, then that's something that you really need to look at and consider changing. If just one person is saying they didn't like a particular scene, but other beta readers are saying that they really did like that scene, then maybe you don't want to change that scene, but I think it's still worth considering, why did that one person say that they didn't like it? Was there something going on underneath that issue on more than just the surface level that you can look at and try to tweak and change things in order to make that scene work a little better? I try not to just dismiss beta reader comments completely out of hand. Even if I don't agree with what they're saying entirely, there's often something underneath that may be contributing to why they felt a certain way about a scene or a character or something like that. And it's worth it to me to at least think about how I can address that or where they were coming from or things like that. If I still have questions or doubts about something, I might even go back to that beta reader or to some of my other beta readers with a question about, what did you think of this scene? Or can you explain to me about your thoughts a little more about this element of the story that you didn't like? Or just to try to get a better idea of what's really going on and maybe come up with a different solution of how I can fix that. It's also really important to keep in mind, what kind of story are you trying to tell, and how is the feedback that you've received going to help you tell that story? Not the story that other people want you to tell, not the story that maybe other readers want to read. It's great to have readers who are excited about your story and really fall in love with your characters and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, you have to be proud of the work that you put out there and tell the story that you wanted to tell. Beta readers should help guide you in that direction, but ultimately, when you are incorporating their feedback, it needs to be in a way that lines up with the story and the vision and the goals that you have for that story. So that's something to ask yourself as well. How can the feedback that you've received help you make your story its best version possible? Sometimes you'll get beta readers who not only tell you what doesn't work, but also suggest a way that you could change it. And sometimes that works really well, and I like taking those comments into consideration. A lot of the times beta readers will raise ideas and themes that I hadn't really thought of before, and so it's helpful to at least think about those things. But other times beta readers will suggest a change or a very specific way to rework the story that just is not in line with what you're trying to do or with the story that you're trying to tell. And in those cases, again, I think it's worth it to just look at what's underneath that and why are they suggesting that. Usually there's something else there that maybe isn't working for them. It might not be working for the story the way that you had intended, but you don't necessarily need to change things the way that a beta reader is suggesting. If it's not what fits for the story and it's not what works best for you, you don't need to change your story to suit someone else's vision of what it should be. When I get a comment like that I don't agree with or that doesn't match up with what I'm trying to do for the story, I just kind of consider it for a minute, try to figure out what else is underneath that, whether it points to some other issue that needs to be explored. And if so, then I'll add that issue to my list of revisions. But if there's nothing else really there, then I just kind of delete the comment and move on. And if that process all sounded like a big mess of confusion, it is. It's a mess. It's very confusing. It's not a very linear process. There's no real step-by-step way to go about it. A lot of the times one comment will branch off and lead to something else, and then pretty soon you've started in chapter 1, but now you're way down here at chapter 27 and you don't really know how you got there. And it's just a whole big confusing sticky spider's web of story issues to fix, and it's a mess and it's overwhelming. And that's just kind of the process sometimes. But it can be really satisfying and really fun to sort through all of that and figure out how to pick it apart and make it work. It's kind of like a puzzle, and there's a whole bunch of different solutions, and you could pick any one of them, but you have to pick the one that works best and that's gonna tell the story that you want to tell. And that can be really exciting to kind of figure that out and piece it all together. It's really where the story starts to take shape and starts to really match up with the vision that you have in your head. And to me, that's just really exciting. And that's why revision is my favorite part of the writing process, because you finally get to do all that stuff that really polishes the story up and makes it readable and enjoyable. This part of the process where I'm sorting through all that feedback and trying to figure out what to change and what not to change and how to go about that, it's not a quick process. It usually takes me at least a few weeks, and for a longer story, it may take even longer. Even when I'm not sitting directly in front of my computer working on it, I often have ideas churning around in my brain and just kind of thinking about different things, so that then when I do go back and sit down at my computer, I already have a lot of ideas and things that I can follow up with and try to piece together. All right, and now we get to the next part, which is the actual revisions themselves. I typically work chronologically and just start at the beginning of the story and work my way through the entire manuscript from start to finish. I will read the whole story through and just make changes as I go. Oftentimes I will read the story out loud, and that helps me to catch some of the clunky sentences or repetitive word choices, or things that just are not working well on a structural level with the story and with the way that the actual words are written and put together. And that just makes for a cleaner manuscript, so that the next time I send it out to beta readers, they're not catching so many of those little errors, and it just kind of makes the whole process easier, so that then when I go on and move on to doing line edits and things like that, then a lot of the story has already been cleaned up. While I'm working through those revisions, I will have that master revision document open right next to the draft that I'm working on. And if I had a beta reader who focused more on wording and line edits and grammar and things like that, oftentimes I'll have their document open as well, just so that I can go through and make any changes that they suggested that I feel are appropriate as I go along. Every time I start a new revising session, I will start by going through that list of revisions that need to be incorporated through the whole story, just so that they're kind of fresh in my mind and I know and can keep an eye out for places where I might be able to work in some of that stuff, whether it's, more character descriptions or a better explanation of some of the world building and things like that. I also make sure that whatever section I'm working on, I review a list of the changes that needed to be made in that section as well. and then I just read and go through and make changes as I go along. I can usually do a chapter or two in a single sitting. Sometimes if it's the weekend and I have a little more free time, I might do more than that. But I do try to take frequent breaks so that I don't get overwhelmed and frustrated. And for me, I can often tell when I'm getting overwhelmed or frustrated because I start trying to talk myself out of making changes that are really important and that I already put on my list and that I already know that I need to make. But when I'm tired and just overwhelmed and frustrated with the story, I will start to talk myself out of those things. Oh, we don't need to fix the dialogue in this section. It's fine for this character to monologue for 5 pages straight. Nobody's gonna notice. It's great. It has a completely valid story purpose for being there. It's fine. It's important to the story, actually, because... See, that's usually a sign that I'm getting overwhelmed and need to just take a break. Sometimes I can get all of my revisions made in one pass. Sometimes it takes 2. Once I've made those changes, or at least most of them, and I don't have anything else on my list of revisions, then it's time to send the story out to beta readers again, so I can start the whole process over. And then after I do that second round of beta reading, usually I'm done and ready to move on to line editing and things like that. And that's a whole separate video that we'll do sometime later, maybe. And that's it. Now you know my entire beta reading process. It's a mess sometimes, and it's very confusing, and it's a lot of trial and error. And honestly, I still am kind of trying to figure some things out with it. I feel like I've come a long ways and my process has evolved a lot over the years, and it's to a point that works really well for me mostly, but there's always room for improvement and changes, and I'm always open to adapting and just trying to figure out what works best for me. Because that's the thing, right? We all just have to do what works best for us. Hopefully there were some things in here that you found helpful or that you can take away and learn from and apply to your own beta reading process. I really love the process of revising and incorporating beta reader feedback. It's so valuable to me and has really helped me grow as a writer and help my stories to improve. And it's really interesting to me to see how other writers do it and how they go about that process. So feel free to leave a comment and let me know kind of what your process looks like. Some of the ways maybe it's similar to mine or ways that it's different. I would love to hear that. And if your process is as messy and chaotic as mine, be sure to let me know that too. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell if you want to see more videos like this in the future. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next time. Bye.